The true Little Mermaid, a princess who gave up her voice for freedom. Long before she was a myth, before her face was painted on seashells and her voice became a song, there lived a girl in the silence of the sea, a girl who was born to royalty, but whose soul longed for freedom more than for a throne. Her name is lost to time, buried beneath waves and rewritten in fairy tales. But history remembers fragments. A foreign princess, a seafaring empire, and a choice that would cost her everything. Today, the world knows her as the Little Mermaid, but what if the story we were told was only a whisper of the truth? This is the tale of a girl who gave up her voice, not for love, but for liberation. The story begins in the waters near Ayutthaya, in what is now Thailand. In the 1600s, this kingdom flourished on rivers and oceans, a maritime empire that sent ships across Asia. Its kings arranged marriages with foreign powers to preserve peace and maintain trade. And among its royal daughters was a girl known for her unmatched beauty and a voice that could tame storms. She sang not for men, but for the sea. People said dolphins followed her. Fishermen claimed her melodies made the waves sleep. But she was not born free. She was born royal, and that meant she belonged to duty. When she was 16, her father summoned her to the Hall of the Lotus. She entered in silk, bare feet silent across stone, eyes lowered. He told her of a marriage, a political alliance. She would be sent across the sea to a European kingdom, Portugal, or France, or Denmark, depending on which records you believe. The name changes, but the story remains. She was to be offered as a bride, a living treaty. She bowed, she smiled, she said nothing, but inside something cracked. She had never left the ocean. Her palace was open to the sea, her walls filled with salt wind and bird cries. The idea of cold castles and foreign tongues made her feel like her bones would turn to coral. Still, she obeyed. Because obedience was expected, and girls like her were never asked what they wanted. The ship left at dawn. The voyage took weeks. She did not eat. She did not sing. She stared at the water as if begging it to take her back. When they reached the foreign court, cold, gray, towering, she was received as a marvel. Pale noblemen called her exotic. They whispered that her hair smelled like jasmine, that her voice was unlike anything they had heard. But she would not speak, not once, not even to the king. They thought it was modesty. It wasn't. It was resistance, because her silence was not a curse cast by a sea witch. It was a choice. She would not speak in a language that was not hers. She would not entertain the court that traded her like a gift. She would not pretend. They called her mute. They called her enchanted. Some even claimed she was not human at all, but a mermaid in disguise. And she let them, because myths were safer than truth. Inside the palace, she was treated like a doll. They dressed her in corsets that stole her breath. They painted her face until she could no longer see herself. They placed her beside the prince and whispered of wedding days. But outside, in the still hours of the morning, she found the shore. There she walked barefoot on cold sand. And for a few precious minutes, she became herself again. She did not sing, but she listened to waves, to gulls, to the sound of her own heartbeat in a place where no one knew her name. That was where the real transformation began. Not with magic, not with potions, but with a girl who decided that if she could not return to the sea, then she would carve a life of her own on land. In the next section, she will defy the court that bound her, meet the woman who would change her fate, and face a choice between obedience and exile. Because the real Little Mermaid didn't lose her voice. She gave it away on her terms. Her silence, once seen as mere obedience, began to shift into something far more unsettling. At first, the court had regarded her quietness as exotic, mysterious, an ornament to be admired. But as weeks passed and she still refused to speak, the admiration turned to discomfort. Rumors clung to her like dew on the palace stones. Some whispered she had no tongue at all. Others said she had been cursed by a shaman at sea, and a few swore that no human voice could ever produce the music they had once heard from her lips. She offered no correction. Her silence remained absolute, not because she was powerless, but because it was the only thing she still possessed entirely. In a world that dictated her name, her marriage, her future, her body, even the air she breathed, the refusal to speak was the last act of defiance she could control. And so she kept her mouth closed, not as a prisoner does, but as a queen might, one who knew the value of restraint. The prince she had been sent to marry, young, golden-haired, groomed for greatness, had grown weary of trying to draw words from her. His courtship, initially performed with polite effort, began to unravel. At first he brought her flowers, then books, then songs performed by royal musicians in the marble atrium just outside her chamber. She watched, always polite, always poised, but said nothing. He smiled less with each passing day. His pride, polished and praised since birth, cracked under the weight of her indifference. Soon his attentions shifted to another, Lady Selene, a noblewoman born of his own land, fluent in wit and charm, and fluent most of all in her ability to reflect his own desires back at him. The court approved. Whispers grew louder. The foreign princess, they said, would likely be sent away quietly, too strange, too stubborn, too silent to be queen. But what they didn't realize was that she was listening. Always. She walked the gardens slowly. She passed through the great halls unnoticed, her presence fading into the background like a tapestry on the wall. And yet, she heard everything. She absorbed every word said when nobles thought she was too foreign to understand, too silent to remember. She began to learn their language, not by asking, not by reading, but by watching, listening, piecing syllables together like puzzle stones until meaning began to form. She memorized gestures, intonations, the politics buried between phrases. While the court dismissed her, she mapped it. Then one night, in a hallway not far from the prince's council chamber, she overheard a conversation that changed everything. A minor lord, Lord Albrecht, speaking in low tones to a foreign envoy. The words were quiet, but precise. A plan to betray the crown, to forge an alliance with an eastern border state, and raise a rebellion under the guise of a trade dispute. It was bold, reckless, and would have torn the kingdom in two if it succeeded. No one else had heard it. No one else had been silent long enough to be invisible. She returned to her chamber and wrote a letter in the native language. Every word carefully formed by hand. It contained no flourish, no preamble. Just a simple message. The man who sits to your left in council speaks with two tongues. He plots against you. No signature. No hint of where it came from. She folded it, sealed it with wax, and placed it on the prince's writing desk while the rest of the palace slept. The next morning, soldiers arrived at Lord Albrecht's estate before sunrise. He was taken without protest, interrogated, confessed. The plot was real, the rebellion forming. And the court, shaken by the speed of the king's justice, fell into whispers and wariness. No one knew who had exposed the traitor, but the prince did. The handwriting, the placement, the quiet precision of it all, it could have only come from her. He did not confront her. He did not thank her. But for the first time since her arrival, he looked at her not with pity, but with something closer to awe. He understood, finally, that her silence was not absence. It was strategy. The power in the court began to shift. No longer an ornament, the foreign princess became a presence to be reckoned with. The nobles, once dismissive, grew cautious in her company. The prince resumed his visits, But now he asked questions not out of duty but out of genuine curiosity, and one day, as they walked through the royal gardens under a veil of early spring fog, he asked her directly, "Why did you never speak?" She looked at him, held his gaze, and answered for the first time since her arrival, "Because it was the only thing I still owned." Her voice, soft but steady, struck him like a thunderclap. He said nothing in return, but his silence this time was not disdain. It was respect. That same week, a visitor arrived. An older woman cloaked in midnight blue, known not by title but by weight, Madame Veil. She had no crest, no estate, but all bowed when she passed. Her eyes held the calm of someone who had seen kings rise and fall without blinking. She asked to see the foreign princess in private, and when they met, she studied the girl as if reading a history written between breaths. Then she said, "You are not here because you were chosen. You are here because your country feared you. They feared the way people listened when you sang, the way silence followed you like a servant." The girl said nothing. Madame Veil continued, "They didn't send you here for peace. They sent you here to disappear. But I see you." Then she stood, handed the girl a folded parchment, and walked away. Inside the parchment was a message. "If you ever wish to leave, not as a bride, not as an exile, but as yourself, meet me at the harbor on the night of the silver tide." There was no seal, no signature, just a door, barely opened. She held the letter for 3 days. Then she burned it. But she remembered every word. The harbor always breathed differently on nights like this. The air, thick with salt and fog, curled around lanterns like ghosts reaching for their former homes. Ships rocked in silence. Ropes creaked against wooden beams. The moon, swollen and pale, hung low over the water, scattering its reflection across the waves like shattered silver. It was the night of the silver tide, the rare moment each year when the moon's pull danced in perfect rhythm with the sea, when the water shimmered unnaturally, glowing as if lit from below. In legends whispered by fishermen and midwives alike, this was a night when anything could happen. Curses could break. Oaths could be heard, and those who were willing to risk everything could vanish into the fog without a trace. She stood at the edge of the dock, cloaked in gray, her face hidden beneath a hood stitched with pearls so fine they looked like raindrops. Her hands trembled beneath the fabric, not from fear, but from memory. Behind her lay a palace full of perfumed masks and porcelain smiles, a kingdom that had tried to tame her with silk and silence. Ahead of her lay something else. Not safety, not certainty, but the first real taste of freedom. She had made her decision. The wedding had been announced earlier that week. Her name, her silence, her story were about to be folded into a crown she had never asked to wear. A parade was being planned, a treaty signed, dresses fitted, letters sent to her homeland declaring success. But no one had asked her. And so, in the deepest part of the night, she left everything behind. The silks, the jewels, the ancestral legacy sewn into her robes. She carried only a small satchel, a ribbon from her mother's hair, and the letter from Madame Veil, memorized and now ash. Madame Veil was already there. She stood at the far end of the dock, near a small boat with dark sails, her posture as calm as the water beneath her. She said nothing as the girl approached. She only nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. They boarded in silence. The boat drifted into the night, pulled by hands unseen. There were no oars, no crew. Just the whisper of sails and the groaning of timber as they slipped beyond the edge of the harbor, past the guards, past the lights, into the realm of fog and myth. Hours passed, or minutes. Time twisted over the silver tide. Then land appeared. Not an island, not a kingdom, but a hidden place untouched by law or crown, a refuge of sorts. Madame Vey led her to a stone house set into the cliffs. Inside were maps, books, herbs hanging from wooden beams, and a wall of letters, hundreds, maybe thousands, written in different hands and languages, all addressed to women who no longer answered to anyone. "You are not the first," Madame Vey said. Her voice was low, steady, cut from years of certainty. "And you will not be the last. Some left thrones, others left prisons. All of them chose to be more than the world allowed." The girl removed her cloak. Her hair, long and unbound, fell over her shoulders like ink across paper. Her face, stripped of makeup and courtly pretense, looked younger than anyone would have guessed. But her eyes held storms. "I don't know who I am," she said quietly, the words tasting foreign in her mouth after so long. "You don't have to know yet," Madame Vale replied. "You only have to decide who you refuse to be." Over the next days, maybe weeks, she stayed in the refuge. No name, no rank, no mirrors. She learned to climb the cliffs barefoot, to read the stars, to make ink from ash and herbs. She wrote in languages she had once pretended not to understand. She read letters from women who had once been queens, slaves, courtesans, generals. Each had walked away from something. Each had paid a price, and each had chosen herself. She still did not sing, but sometimes when the wind was right, she would hum to the sea, and when she did, the water calmed. Eventually, Madame Vey told her the truth, that this network, this hidden sisterhood, had existed for centuries, that not all revolutions are loud. Some begin with silence. Some are born in the moment a girl says, "No more." There were outposts like this one across the world, places where voices once stolen could grow back, places where women erased from history could write new pages. The girl listened. She asked questions. And one morning she stood before the mirrorless wall and spoke aloud, "I would like to go to the next place." Vey didn't ask why. She simply nodded. By the time the court realized the princess was gone, she had already vanished from their records. The treaty collapsed. The prince married the noblewoman, though scandal lingered. The foreign kingdom sent no inquiry, perhaps embarrassed, perhaps relieved. And the girl once called the Little Mermaid became something else entirely. She traveled through cities disguised as a healer, wrote poetry under a false name, taught other girls to read, to listen, to say no. She never returned to the sea, but every time she stood near the shore, the waves remembered her. Every time she passed through a market or a village square, women whispered without knowing why. And though the world forgot her name, they kept the story. They twisted it, softened it, made it suitable for bedtime. They said she gave up her voice for love. They said she turned to seafoam for a man who didn't love her back. They made it pretty. But they got it wrong. Because she didn't lose her voice. She gave it up to claim her life. She no longer walked like someone waiting for permission. Every step she took was rooted in purpose now, quiet, yes, but unshakable. The girl who had once stared out at the sea in silence, dreaming of escape, had become a woman who moved through the world like a question that refused to be answered. Her name had vanished from royal records. Her face had disappeared from paintings. The court no longer spoke of her, and if they did, they spoke in riddles, half myth, half scandal. But across the edges of the world, from cloisters to marketplaces, her legend was just beginning to stir. They called her many things: the silent one, the drowned bride, the ghost of the silver tide. In the docks of Marseille, sailors whispered that a woman with hair like the sea healed a merchant's son with a single touch. In a hilltop village in northern India, a wandering teacher arrived wrapped in blue, teaching girls to speak poetry in their own dialects, forbidden until then. In Alexandria, a scribe received letters written in 3 languages, all signed with the same mark, a single, curling wave. It wasn't fame she wanted. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. She began to gather stories, of girls sold in treaties, of sisters married off to seal broken alliances, of princesses who died nameless in foreign beds, and she wrote them down. Each name, each memory, carved into paper like it could undo the forgetting. She carried them with her in a leather-bound book, never read aloud, but never hidden either. Her silence was no longer an absence. It had become a library. And yet, there were nights when the ache returned. Not for the palace, not for the prince, but for the sea. She would sit at the edge of whatever coastline she found herself near, sometimes warm, sometimes frigid, and listen. The sea never asked her to explain. It only answered with tide and foam and wind, like it had missed her too. On one such night, many years after the night of the silver tide, she met a girl with eyes like her own, not in color but in expression, wide with knowing, heavy with not yet spoken truths. The girl was no one by birth, a servant, a whisper in the background of her master's estate. But she carried herself like something caged. They sat in silence first. The girl offered bread. The woman, once a princess, accepted. Then the girl asked, "Is it true that you gave up your voice to escape a wedding?" The woman laughed for the first time in weeks. "No," she said. "I gave up a kingdom to hear myself think." That girl never returned to the estate. She left in the night with only what she could carry. Her story was added to the book, one wave among many. By now, the network of women like her had grown vast. They passed messages in plain sight, a folded note inside a bag of flour, a verse scratched into a prayer scroll, a song hummed off-key on purpose. All of it meant something. All of it was a signal. You are not alone. You do not have to stay. There is another life. The woman who had once been a sea-born princess now lived in the highlands of a fog-covered coast. She taught by day, wrote by candlelight, and disappeared into markets without being noticed. She was both legend and neighbor. And though no one called her by name, everyone felt her presence when she passed. Like a wind that clears fog, like a silence that speaks louder than noise. She did not seek out the sea anymore, but the sea always found her. In the next and final section, we'll return to the power she carried, not as a girl who gave up everything, but as a woman who chose herself over every lie ever told about love, sacrifice, and silence. There is a kind of silence the world tries to teach girls, a silence that comes wrapped in lace and tradition. It looks like obedience. It sounds like elegance. It feels like approval. But it is a silence built on fear. Fear of being too loud, too bold, too wild, too much. They tell you to smile instead of speak, to nod instead of argue, to wait for your turn, which never really comes. And the moment a girl dares to ask for more, to own her name, her story, her sound, the world begins to panic. That was the silence she had been born into, royal silence, the kind gilded in gold and wrapped in duty. As a child, she had been praised for her quietness. As a bride, she had been chosen for it. And when she finally broke it, when she spoke not in song but in truth, they called her dangerous. But she had learned long ago that silence is not the absence of power. It is a tool, and when used with intent, it can reshape the world. Years passed, decades, and still she traveled. The woman who had once been bartered like a treaty became a shadow that carried light, not because she stood in the spotlight, but because she helped others find theirs. She never returned to her homeland, not because she wasn't welcome, but because she no longer belonged to any one place. She had become something else, a story that survived. In the far north, a village of women built a school named after a wave. In the far south, a sanctuary for girls fleeing forced marriage hung a symbol above the doorway, a single open shell. In the east, a traveling theater performed her tale, altered only in names, told in firelight. and everywhere she had left footprints, the silence began to break. Slowly, like a glacier melting, like a tide rising. Her own voice changed too. Once soft and uncertain, it now carried the depth of oceans. When she spoke, people stopped what they were doing, not because she was loud, but because she said only what mattered. She never wasted breath. And when she taught, she didn't begin with history or law or books. She began with listening. "I cannot give you your voice," she would say, "but I can show you where you left it." In one coastal town, a group of girls asked her what it felt like to run away from everything you've ever known. "It didn't feel like freedom at first," she admitted. "It felt like drowning. But that's the trick the world plays on you. It makes you believe that staying silent is breathing, and breaking free is the end. But once you learn to breathe your own air, you never go back to holding someone else's." She never told them the whole story, not because she was ashamed, but because the story no longer belonged to her alone. It belonged to all of them. One winter, an old man came to her door. He was bent with age, wrapped in furs too fine for a peasant, but too worn for a noble. He looked at her for a long time before he spoke. "I was there once," he said, "when they whispered that you had vanished, that you had failed. They called it a tragedy." She smiled. "They were half right. Why didn't you come back?" he asked. "They would have listened to you eventually." "I didn't need them to listen," she said. "I needed to hear myself." And with that, she closed the door gently, because she owed no one an explanation. She had already given enough. When she died, it was not with ceremony. No throne, no marble tomb, no mourning bells, just the wind moving through the trees like a song only the earth remembered. They buried her by the sea, beneath the cliffs where her story had first begun to change. The tide reached up to kiss the shore one final time that day, higher than usual, silver as the night she escaped. No one cried, but many came. Women from cities and forests and forgotten corners of empires. Some lit candles. Others wrote her name on stone. A few sat silently, heads bowed, palms open, not in prayer but in thanks. And yet her story did not end there. Because stories like hers never truly end. They drift, they echo, they surface in unexpected places. And sometimes they grow legs. So now when you hear the story of the Little Mermaid, the version cleaned up for lullabies and bedtime books, listen a little closer. Listen between the lines, because you might just hear her, humming softly beneath the waves, reminding you that the real magic wasn't in turning into a human, or chasing a prince, or dissolving into seafoam. The real magic was in saying no, in choosing self over silence, in walking away from a kingdom she didn't want, to build a world no one had imagined. A world where love wasn't traded, where power wasn't stolen, where a girl's voice wasn't the price of her freedom but the proof of it. And if one day someone ever tells you that sacrifice means giving up your voice for someone else's happiness, you look them in the eye and say, "The Little Mermaid didn't lose her voice. She gave it away so she could speak on her own terms. Because the fairy tale you were told, that was only half the story. The rest, the truth, belongs to her. And now maybe to you, for the stories behind the stories. For the legends that were almost erased, and for the voices that were never meant to be silent. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or remember who you are, like, comment, subscribe, because we're not done telling the truth. Not even close.